This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers. This week, we have literally one of America's best group of political analysts talking about what's been happening over the last couple of weeks in the political campaign for presidency. We start with a conversation about the unfortunate event this week that took place with an attempted assassination of one of the two candidates for president, Donald Trump. In that discussion, we talk about how right-wing extremist groups are now trying to utilize that to propagate violence throughout the United States, and how they're blaming Jews and other minority groups as well as liberal interests for what had happened. We also have a discussion about the U.S. Supreme Court decision on immunity and what that actually means for the race. We spend time talking about Project 2025, which is Donald Trump's program or project of over 900 pages and their vision for what they want to do in America. And last, we talk about Joe Biden and Joe Biden's pathetic debate where a number of people, including myself, are calling on him to step down and to move away. Last, we also talk about J.D. Vance and what's happening in the Republican convention this week. I'm Paul Johnson, and I'm just an ordinary optimistic American who still believes that America is a cause for good. And I still believe that in the end, this country is not only going to survive, but we're going to thrive. If you like what it is that we're talking about, push that subscribe button, and let's get on with having some fun in this show.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon and dissecting and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, so in today's show, we started off about a week ago. We were going to have a conversation about the debate. The debate was earth-shattering. Everyone who watched it can certainly tell you what they saw of Joe Biden. But we thought, this is going to be really important. And a few days later, it was the Supreme Court decision. We knew, oh gosh, we're going to have to include the Supreme Court decision. And then information started coming out about Project 2020. And again, we thought, well, we're going to have to modify it a little bit. And then the other day, the unfortunate assassination attempt, unfortunate that it happened, assassination attempt of Donald Trump, means you can't have a conversation about this campaign without talking about that. Now, we have four guests with us. Elliot Pollack, who is kind of the oracle of economic news, both in Arizona and around the country. Syndicated columnist Bob Robb, who's on Substack. He's one of my favorite columnists. He does a lot of great conversations about lots of different things, but he comes from a conservative point of view. And then Henry, which I'm a little worried about since all this stuff happened. He's back in New Zealand. I don't know if that's a statement about worried about what's going on in the country anyway, but Henry, I guess you're back there with your family?
Yeah, I had the trip home planned a long time ago, Paul, so I have I'm not fleeing the chaos.
Okay. Yeah. People buying homes in Canada and everything else anymore. All right. So let's, I'm going to start with what happened with Donald Trump the other day. And I'm going to start with just a little bit of information, but I'm definitely interested in everybody's point of view on this. We had a shooter, I believe his name was Thomas Crook, 21-year-old young man. We don't know a lot about him. We know he was a Republican. We know that he had given like $15 to some Democratic cause somewhere along the line in his life. I don't know if that was a day ago or 10 years ago. Couldn't have been too long ago, with noting his age. We don't know if he's kind of a shadow member of the liberal left, or maybe he's a never again Trumper, or for that matter, he could be a member of a far right-wing group trying to start a race war in the United States. We know very little about him, and I don't know that we're ever going to know much about him. In fact, my bet is we're going to figure out that he's just a loner who found himself with an AR-15, I guess he took from his father, and committed a horrendous act. I do want to make mention that there was one individual who lost his life and another one or two that are in critical condition. The one man who lost his life was a person who had served in the United States military. He was there with his family. He utilized his body to save them. He was a hero. I don't think there's any other way of looking at that. I think it's also important to point out that you shouldn't have to worry about this type of thing in America. Not at a rock concert, and not if you're going to watch your candidate speak. The people who were there, the Trump people who were there for their candidate, they not only have a right to be there, but it's good that they're there. It's good that they're there supporting American democracy and what is taking place. The issue with Donald Trump, first, he's a victim, and this was, I don't think that there's any justification for that taking place. But one of the things that's become clear, while we don't know a lot about the shooter, we just put together another program with a social scientist where we were talking about these right-wing organizations who are clearly utilizing this as a means to organize and as a means to promote more violence. There was a group called, I think, the Goya Individual State that put up a comment about this was an assassination attempt against Donald Trump by the Jewish community. We have Nick Fontes, who's kind of the noted far right-wing racist who got invited to Mar-a-Lago and became famous for that. He's talking about it being the Mossad and part of the black organizations that are engaged with it. They're engaged in trying to promote it. To me, there are two parts to this. The first one is it going to have any impact on the election? And I'm open to hearing everyone's comment on that. But the other question is, are we as Americans going to allow this to further divide us? Are we going to allow it as a means for us to begin to talk about what Trump has been saying or what Trump's been doing, to talk about whether or not this was a leftist conspiracy or a Jewish conspiracy? Are we going to allow this to further divide us, or are we going to see it for what it is, which is not only an unfortunate event, but an event that just shouldn't take part in American politics? Elliot, I'll start with you. I'll give you kind of first dibs on this one.
I think that the sickness that these guys are talking about is the Mossad, it's Jews, it's Democrats, it's social, whatever it is. It's insane, and there's no place in that in American society for that. Just as a general statement. And it's sad, but it's the nature of having the internet and dealing with this stuff day to day, and that anybody can say anything he wants. And you'd have to be, in my estimation, really sick as an individual and deranged to listen to this stuff and think it has any credibility. And from that standpoint, I was watching it on TV when it happened. I'm glad, obviously, that he missed for a lot of reasons. But more than anything, the impact is going to be on, and basically, it was pointed out, Democratic voters might, after seeing this in the debate, might decide, I'm staying home on November 5th. I'm not going to go to I'm not going to vote. And a Democrat who doesn't vote on December 5th is basically voting for Trump. On the other hand, if I'm a Republican, and I don't think that Trump was thinking about it, but when he got up to show people it was all right, and he stuck his arm in the air with all the Secret Service around him, that has the potential of becoming an iconic picture, just like Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. And that is going to energize the Republican end of things. So I think that the attempt had just the opposite effect, or will prove to have just the opposite effect that this guy was trying to do by getting Trump out of the election. Yeah, and there's going to be questions about the Secret Service and why was this guy up there, and some people saw him, blah, 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 blah. That's just noise. The fact is that the overriding principle is it's going to help Trump and hurt Biden, but that there is no place for anything like that in American society. It should be shunned by every American, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, certainly everyone should condemn the assassination attempt and attempts to exploit that politically, particularly for things without any evidence or justification whatsoever. And that's particularly true given the fact that there is often a very tenuous relationship between a lone wolf assassination attempt and current, then contemporary politics. Ronald Reagan's would-be assassin was trying to impress a movie star. One of Gerald Ford's would-be assassins thought somehow she was saving the redwoods from pollution. So we need to kind of set aside, I think, this event from our current political deliberations until we know more about his motivation. But even if his motivation was political to take out Trump as a candidate, that's in no reflection on anyone other than him. And we need to have that perspective. Politically, I think it helps Trump. He showed some grace, literally under fire. I think that helps his strongman image, particularly against an increasingly enfeebled Biden. I think it cements even more strongly the support he has in the MAGA movement and motivates, as Elliot suggested, his voters to turn out on an occasion where there are a variety of reasons for Democrats to be discouraged about their prospects and perhaps sitting this one out, or at least this race out.
Henry, you're a long distance away, so you gain some perspective on this from that. Tell us your input and what you're seeing in New Zealand.
Well, over here, it's been big news. It's top of the news headlines and the top of the evening news every night over here, and people are dismayed that something like this could happen. And I think a lot of commentators are seeing this as a further sign of the increasing polarization and general trend towards disorderly mobilization and now even more violence in the American political system. And I think it's a legitimate concern. So I agree with all the comments here that you have to put it in its rightful place, try and disassociate it from the general process of the election, which, of course, democratic decision-making is a way of avoiding violence, right? We make decisions through elections so we don't have to have any sort of more violent or disorderly confrontation, and put it in its rightful place. And hopefully people can use this as an opportunity to recommit to the democratic process in the United States rather than stoking these conspiracy theories and other things, narratives that are going to lead to further escalation of this disorderly mobilization. And I believe that the Republican convention is coming up, and I really hope that Trump strikes a magnanimous tone there, and sort of a unifying tone, I think, would be called for. And let's see. I hope that he does do that.
Yeah, he talked about having a unity speech, scrapping whatever his old speech was and going for a unity speech. I don't think it's lost on most Americans that the people that are standing up, that are talking about this as being partisan incited, are in fact trying to incite more problems. They're utilizing this event as a means to try to promote their own cause. It is an important time, I think, I think it helps Trump no matter what. I don't think they need to say anything on the right-wing side. It's going to help him no matter what. As Elliot said, there's an iconic picture. But I think the blaming the liberal media or the left or other people, first, there's absolutely no evidence for that. And secondarily, I think it actually harms their cause because it points out they're the ones stoking further problems. But let's go to really what I think is the core of this campaign at this point in time, and that's the debate. We all watched that debate, and Joe Biden is trying to frame this as an hour and a half where he just had a bad day. My problem with that, first, I have said this in the past. I have problems with Donald Trump, and here's my single biggest problem. I watched the events on January 6th. I watched the guys trying to beat out the window with the park bench. I watched our congressional delegation having to hide, security police having to be there, police officers' faces being squeezed in the doorway. as much of a problem as that was, it annoys me every single time I hear Donald Trump act as if it didn't happen, act as if he had nothing to do with it, to take no responsibility and no accountability. I would be much more inclined to forgive him if he said, this was wrong and I played a role in it. It's unfortunate it happened, but it's not the way that we should operate. But I feel like he's lying to me. When Joe Biden says, and his staff says, this was an hour and a half debate that was just a bad day, I feel like they're lying to us. I watched the debate. It seems to me like it was a lot more than a bad hour and a half. I left that debate with the absolute belief he has to be replaced. I'd love to have each of your opinion. Henry, I'll start with you on this one.
I was shocked by the debate, to be honest. I had been following in the news, especially there was a recent article, long article on the Wall Street Journal with interviews with Republican and Democratic lawmakers describing meetings with Biden and how his mental abilities, I guess you could call it, seemed to be going downhill. But I was shocked that he would perform so badly in a debate for the simple reason that I thought that he would be so well prepared and so well rested that such a, moment where he lost his train of thought and couldn't continue a sentence, I just didn't think it was possible that they would allow that to happen. So I was deeply, deeply shocked. I agree that I don't think he's up to the job of president probably right now. Raises all sorts of questions about his ability to do the job right now, let alone in 4 years. And on the political side, since the debate, the entire discussion has just been, can he do the job? And I don't know how he continued this campaign where every public appearance he has is not about what he says or what he wants to present to the people as an agenda. It's literally, can he do this job? And his every move is dissected in that way. I don't know how a campaign can continue when that is the narrative and he's unable to get any message across. So I still quite strongly predict that he's going to be forced out of the race. I just don't know how and when.
Elliot, so I think that's a good point. Can he continue even doing this job? What's surprising to me is he's not only hearing this from people on the right, it seems to be unanimous amongst the Clinton organization, the Obama organization, Axelrod, a variety of different people on CNN, MSNBC, who are all kind of promoting that idea that he doesn't have the mental capability to finish on this campaign. But that also has an effect on his ability to do the job that he's doing, because if people lose faith in the president, that's really all he has, is their faith that he can do the job. Your thoughts on both the job and the effect on the campaign itself?
Well, like I said before, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And as Henry said, people's focus aren't going to be on the content of what he says. It's going to be how he says it, little pauses, thoughts, whatever it is. If he was 25 years old, he couldn't get through without doing something that the press would deal with. In his 80s, there's not a chance in the world. And this is the man who's making decisions when we're facing three adversaries at the same time, when we have some economic problems, when we have other issues. I don't think he's up to it. And I don't know how he could possibly last another 5 weeks until the convention. I agree with Henry on that. It's my sadness is that this isn't something that happened overnight. I hate to use the word handlers, but the people who were close to him had to know about this, had to know how bad it was. It just didn't happen 2 Thursdays ago.
I've called for Biden to step aside or for the delegates to choose another nominee. It seems clear that he is an increasingly enfeebled elderly man. And even his performances after the debate, the press conference after the NATO conference, even his address from the Oval Office That's the feeling you get. I think the extent to which he's mentally slipped is exaggerated. Even in the debate, he was aware of the topics. He had a compendium of facts and positions that he sort of got out there. But the job of President of the United States just isn't an appropriate one for someone of his age and his condition, particularly since there's consistent reporting that it's been in decline over the last year. And there's only one vector in terms of which it is headed. I think it's imperative for the Democrats to move in a different direction, one way or the other, to give the people of the United States a true choice in November as to the kind of leadership that they want and the direction in which they want the country to head.
You know, from my point of view, a president has a variety of different jobs. One job that they have is to be able to make key decisions. I don't know that this is affecting his ability to make key decisions. It's not lost on me that the way any administration works, my mayor's office or a governor's office, and certainly a presidency, 98% of the decisions are made by the people around you. It's just the truth. It's why who they appoint becomes so important in the process. He's not making the real decisions down in the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, or over in the Treasury's, in the Secretary of Treasury's office. They're being made by people that he's appointed. For the most part, I don't agree with all of them, but they seem like competent people. They seem like they kind of know their job. He has to make probably 2% of the decisions, maybe 5%. I don't know how he's doing on that score. But I think it's also the job of a president to inspire us. We have big, big challenges. And Bob, you said something last week, and I've really thought a lot about it, which is this isn't any worse than it was in the 1960s. In fact, it's not nearly as bad as it was in the 1960s. But every generation has its own set of unique problems. We have Russia, China, Iran that we're trying to deal with. There's a new changing world order that really is happening. I think the United States is going to play a significant role, but we're going to have to figure out what that role is, and we're going to have to make choices because we don't have the Navy that was the size that it once was before. There's huge shifts that are taking place around the world. And here there are shifts taking place as well. Not only the far right, which can create a challenge, but the far left, what we're seeing happening on college campuses, the ability to find a way to pull us back together. That takes a president who can be inspirational. Now, I don't see either one of these guys having the ability to do that. In fact, I think Trump is probably the best expert I've ever seen at dividing us as opposed to inspiring us. The only way to counter that is with somebody who has a chance to inspire us. Now, I'm not a Kamala fan. I said Kamala the other day and somebody criticized before, so I guess it's Kamala that I should be saying. I'm not her fan, but she has a better chance of pulling off a aspirational point of view than Biden does at this time. I don't think he could pull it off if he had to. It's past him. So the question I would ask you from your column, it's a great column. I encourage our listeners to listen to it. If a replacement's going to take place, talk about how that happens.
The way I think it should happen is through an open Democratic convention, kind of comparable to what we had in the 1950s and 1960s, and even to a certain degree into the 1970s, where the delegates actually deliberate and choose a replacement nominee. Ideally, that would be after Biden voluntarily steps away. But there are provisions within the Democratic Convention rules that has sort of a conscious out from voting from the person to whom you were pledged. So that there is, within the convention rules, at least a modicum of room for the convention delegates, even if Biden doesn't voluntarily step away, to ignore their pledge and choose somebody else. When these delegates were amassed, knowledge of Biden's condition wasn't common knowledge. They thought that they were pledged to support a candidate with more vigor. And I don't think there's anything in democratic norms, small d, that requires a political party to put forth a candidate, to nominate a candidate whom they don't believe is up to doing the job. And I believe that is the condition that Democratic delegates find them in. I don't like some of the alternatives, a mini primary or a series of town halls. There are approximately 4,500 Democratic delegates that are going to gather. They can be fairly considered to represent the mainstream of Democratic political sentiment. Having them deliberate and choose an alternative candidate, I think, is the most small d Democratic way to go, and would have at least some element of Democratic legitimacy facing a general electorate during the general election.
So talk to me about the advantages. So I've been to 3 Democratic conventions. I spoke at one of them, the one for Paul Tsongas when he was running against Bill Clinton in Bill Clinton's first year. In fact, on that one, my favorite point was when I went up to speak, there were 4,000 delegates, and they wanted to hear from Paul Tsongas, but Paul had people didn't know this at the time, his cancer was coming back, and so he wasn't even sure he was going to speak. So I get up to speak, and they start chanting, "We want Paul, we want Paul." And I knew immediately that they weren't paying attention, that I was Paul Johnson, the mayor. So I just let them go. My mom said, "Oh my God, they were chanting for you. They wanted you." But in any event, it worked at least with my mother. I don't know if it worked with anybody else in the public. But when you get to those delegates, for a little bit of period of time, we weren't sure that Bill Clinton was going to have the amount of delegates that he needed. Same thing happened in Gary Hart's race. That didn't happen in General Clark's race. But nonetheless, there's a process that you go through to be able to gather delegates. Now, for the most part, they try to do that in secret, right? Meaning you go around and you try to convince the person who helps select the delegates. You're right. They represent a cross-section of people in the Democratic Party. You can bet those delegates they're labor delegates, African Americans, Hispanics, people who are gay. There's a wide variety of different people who represent Democratic constituencies in each one of those states, although it was usually a state governor or a senator that helped select what that actual mix was and who the people were representing it, which gives an incredible amount of strength to the governors. Now, one process that they could follow is, theoretically, the Biden could agree was going to step down, and he could just say, Kamala is the only one who I'm going to give support to, and they could go out and try to lobby all of the delegates to just coronate her along with her VP. You had talked about you didn't like the idea of going out and doing these mini town halls. So would you see there as first, do you think politically it's a mistake to just appoint a Kamala? And secondarily, would the process that you're talking about just be a series of discussions and debates amongst the delegates when they got to the convention? Help me understand that just a little bit better.
I do think it would be a mistake. It would be suboptimal from a Democratic perspective to simply make Harris the replacement nominee. I think if she emerged as the nominee in an open convention, she would be stronger, actually, in the general election than if she was simply anointed by Biden on his way out, and the delegates accepted that. I have seen proposals to try to structure the convention to require candidates who want to run are to be considered to announce themselves and to have speeches before the convention and other things. I think that's a mistake because I think that there may be a process of discovery that could occur. I would that obviously until you get to the point where you're actually submitting nominees and holding votes, there'll be a lot of maneuvering that goes on amongst the delegates of people interested, jockeying for support, or even people who aren't interested being somewhat drafted. And so I think you allow that process to occur without any kind of limitations or prerequisites attached to it, so that it becomes, to the maximum extent possible, an actual deliberation of discovery. My anticipation is that it would take several votes in order to settle on a nominee. But again, I think at the end of that process, you have a degree of legitimacy for the replacement candidate. And if that replacement candidate is Harris, she will be stronger from having come through that process than simply having it handed to her.
I think you have to understand, as far as I'm concerned, there is no optimal solution. Every solution going forward is suboptimal at this point, not because of who may or may not get the nomination, but you're asking people to totally vet in their minds somebody that they usually would have 6 or 9 months to think about and hear about and watch, and do it in about 8 weeks, maybe 9 weeks. I think that's going to be real interesting to get these people vetted in that period of time. Maybe I'm wrong. They'll be able to do it, but I think whatever solution we're talking about, and Bob is talking about the reality of the situation, and I agree with what he's saying, but unfortunately, it's so late in the race that I would not look for an optimal solution, because there is not one, in my opinion. There's solutions, but I don't think they're optimal.
No, I agree with you. They're not optimal. Which would you say, though, is better? Leaving Biden in place to just go through the rest of the election, even if you thought he was going to lose, or appointing someone new? How would you see which is better from the Democratic standpoint? Well,
clearly, I think that a new face would have a better chance than Biden has. It's like a redo for the Democratic Party, and that's fine, because you now know, as Bob said, a lot of things that were only talked about before but are now self-evident. But it would be better if Biden stepped down himself. I think he could turn this into a fiasco in next month at the convention if he stays in and continues to show what the continued deterioration. And I don't think there's any way that he doesn't. So I agree with that it should be somebody else. Will it be somebody else? I don't know. But I look at the bench for the Democratic Party, and I'm not overly impressed. I live part of the year in California, and I got to tell you, Newsom is absolutely no prize. Kamala Harris is no prize. There's a couple of other people that I think, as Democrats, could present well in that short period of time. But it's unfortunate we've come to this, is all I'm saying. And that Bob's take on it, which is these people should get vetted as quickly as possible, is the correct one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think at the last meeting, Elliot, you said something along the lines of, I've never felt a greater sense of distrust for my government and the system than I felt in the last few months. And this was before the debate. There's a real sense of betrayal from what happened with the Democratic Party from my standpoint, a huge sense of betrayal. So Henry, you were about to make a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say that I actually agree with Bob that this sort of a convention process would be very advantageous to the Democrats, because it would at least allow them to shift the media narrative to who is their new nominee going to be. There will be a lot of interest in the convention. And to Elliot's point that there's not going to be a lot of time to vet the candidate, that's very, very true by American standards. But remember that in other parts of the world, in the UK or over here, 6 or 8 weeks is about as long as anyone campaigns for a general election. So it would force the American system to kind of cohere with a campaign duration similar to other countries, which would kind of be interesting and not completely without precedent. But I agree with Elliot's broad point that these are all suboptimal outcomes. And Paul, you're right, there's been a lot of loss of trust in what exactly was going on with Biden, how things were allowed to get to this point. And the Democrats are going to be starting from a real deficit, I think, of public opinion, name recognition for their candidate, etc. But they have to do something, I think. And if Biden proceeds to be so stubborn and through November and refuse to step down, yes, the convention probably will be chaotic that they're going to have in Chicago. I believe it probably will be chaotic with a lot of opposition to Biden, and who knows what could happen. And it might take on the sort of character of almost a foregone conclusion. People might lose interest. Their voter enthusiasm could be very low, and it could turn into a real landslide for Trump. So I don't see them having any good options in this situation at all.
Yeah, I don't think they have good options either. And I do think this issue of Biden choosing to leave is important. I said in one of my commentaries, I was up hiking on Mount Whitney a week ago, and while I was on this mountain, it's not a very technical mountain, but there was one part where I had to be roped in and or kind of clinging to the side of this mountain, 2,000 feet drop below me, 1,000 foot up above me. And, you're standing on a ledge. It's about 2 inches wide. You have your fingers tied to it, a harness hooked to you, and a backpack. And the backpack, on this particular backpack, I had made the mistake. I'd put it on right, but I had forgotten to tighten down the shoulder straps. And so when I went to look up, I turned my head back, the weight of the pack, about 20 pounds, flipped out about 6 inches and pulled me away from the mountain, right? And I began to scramble with everything that I possibly could to hang on to this mountain. Finally, my guide who was with me, she says, "Paul, I got you, right?" And I calmed down and I was able to get going again. With Biden, he's making this decision. It's a hard decision. There are a whole bunch of other people tethered to this rope. In fact, the entire American public is tethered to this rope. And he's having to make this decision of cutting himself loose. That's basically what's going on, right? And he's afraid. He's worried. There's this point in time when you're the guy that's scrambling, that you're only thinking about one person, yourself. That's all I was thinking about. I love you guys, but I wasn't thinking 1 minute about you during that minute that my backpack flipped backwards and I was worried about survival. I was thinking about me. This is also, though, the period of time that heroes are made from. Just that simple. All right, if he cuts that rope, if he lets it go, I think he ends up being actually a hero, regardless of whether the Democrat wins or loses. Right? He saves whatever legacy he has. I think if he goes forward in this campaign, he is a schmuck of epic proportions. There will not be a president look down upon him more than this one, almost by all sides. The other side already didn't like him. His side's not going to like him. They're going to be really upset. So in any event, to me, that's the big question. And so the question is, will he let go?
I would say it's 50-50 at this point in time. I think your description of him is actually kind. Biden has always had, like most politicians, present company accepted, an exaggerated sense of himself and of his indispensability. I don't think that he is thinking altruistically. So I do believe there will need to be an intervention. if he is to step aside, at least nominally, voluntarily. And you're seeing a little bit of that develop. You mentioned that both the Obama and the Clinton political clans have started the process of setting that up. He has reportedly resisted pretty vigorously any rank and file Republican congressman suggesting that he ought to think about doing something else. But I do believe if it's going to happen, it's going to require an intervention to get him to that point that he's not going to get there on his own.
No, I agree. All right, so let's use this as a transition point to talk about what happened in the Supreme Court decision. A lot of Americans are worried that the Supreme Court decision basically set up the idea that presidents have absolute immunity and that everything that Trump did on January 6th, he could replicate and there'd be no accountability for it. I think one of the Supreme Court justices used the analogy of a SEALs team could come in and assassinate the opponent based upon the orders of the president. They wouldn't be held accountable for it. I'd love to know everyone's thoughts here on what the Supreme Court actually did, and did it make you more or less inclined to be worried about Trump? Bob, I'm going to start with you.
What the Supreme Court did was to create a roadmap, a legal roadmap for considering whether the president has immunity for any particular act or not. And I think that the extent to which it provides excessive liberty for presidents to misbehave will depend on how it is implemented and applied to specific fact situations. For example, I don't think there's any question that in the lead up to the Electoral College vote in 2021, that Trump was not acting as president. He was acting as a candidate in virtually everything that he did. In his solicitation of having his electors declare themselves to be the official votes, to his importuning Pence to ignore the legally certified results from various states, to the speech that he gave prior to the January 6th insurrection. He wasn't operating principally through his appointees to the government. He was acting principally through his campaign and people like Rudy Giuliani and other outside legal operatives and legal advisors. So I think it's fairly easy to establish that he was acting as a candidate, not as president. In the classified documents case, he wasn't president when he was holding on to classified materials and hiding them from lawfully executed subpoenas. So I don't think there's any way that he can argue that his actions in that context were in his capacity as a president, as opposed to his capacity as an ex-president. So I think that there are ways in which you apply it to the facts that reduces the sense of fear about giving excessive liberty to misbehaving presidents. And so I think judging that decision needs to wait till we see how it works its way out in the courts.
So would you say that you're at least hopeful that their decision may actually work out in being clarifying as opposed to providing absolute immunity?
Yes, I believe that there is the possibility of creating sharp distinctions between what a president does as president, qua president, and what he does as a private citizen or as a candidate. And I think that the Trump cases provide illustrations of where you could draw that in a way that the nightmarish scenarios in the dissent become less of a concern. So if you use the Sotomayor nightmare scenario of ordering a SEAL team to kill a private citizen, a political opponent, I think that has it has the form of being an official act. I issued an order, but it wasn't to advance any legitimate purpose of a president. It is to advance the interest of that person as a candidate. I believe that the decision leaves room while protecting presidents to make decisions, not fearing subsequent legal consequences, and inhibiting the exercise of energetic powers within the presidency, which the Federalist Papers say is central to that office. I believe that you can do that in the way that they've done it while maintaining accountability for presidents that misuse their office for personal gain, and particularly when they're not really operating in the capacity of being president. They're operating either as a private citizen or as a candidate.
So, Elliot, I'm going to ask it to you in a little different way. I agree with Bob. What the decision did is it spoke about there being areas where the president had absolute immunity, some areas where he had questionable immunity, and then a third area where they did not have immunity. Now, I don't know how good a job they did at clarifying those and really helping us make a distinction on the basis that that Bob had spoken about. But the really big question on this is, should a president have immunity for all acts? I think he should have immunity for things that he does in going to war. I think he should have immunity for things that he has, the decisions that he makes that are related to the regular course of business for a president. But the question is, should he have immunity for all things? Should he be above the law? How do you see that question?
Clearly, nobody should be above the law. But I think Bob has laid it out very clearly and very succinctly that we won't know until we see the cases that the Supreme Court in the future has to rule on. And a lot of people felt, as you know, probably close to a third of the country believes that America's turned into a banana republic and that the legal system was used against Trump unfairly. I'm looking forward to cases moving forward to see how this particular decision plays out. I think Sotomayor's example is ridiculous, and I don't think that's what it said. But again, I'm not a Supreme Court justice, but it appears to me that they, as Bob said, try to lay out a framework, and on a case-by-case basis, they will decide. Am I going to panic over it? No. Do I want the use of the legal system to harass somebody on the other side of the political spectrum to continue? No. They both have to stop, and I think this is a good start. But, time will tell.
Henry, how did this play out in foreign media that you were looking at?
I have to say that this particular issue didn't receive a lot of play in the foreign media. It's of far more relevance to an American audience, and I think also to a very politically engaged American audience. I pretty much am glad to have Bob here to explain the situation to me, and what he said kind of corresponds to the reading that I did on the topic. Obviously, the Supreme Court has to weigh in here and make some sort of a distinction between the president being able to act decisively under all sorts of different situations without fear of prosecution, but also drawing some sort of bounds such that the individual who holds the office of the president can't behave with complete impunity across all sorts of different scenarios. And I think that the Supreme Court tried to walk that line in a way that can be taken up by lower courts and in other cases in the future. So I think perhaps, it's a little bit above the pay grade of most people following American politics, especially from abroad, a little bit too complex and in the details. But B, I also don't really share the kind of hysterical response to this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think for me, the area that I took some comfort in, I thought, again, I thought the decision should have been more clear and given better guidance. But the area that I felt comfortable with the decision was whatever they do with Trump is actually only a part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, what do other presidents do going forward? There are some key factors here that I think are important. Here's the first one. They didn't give immunity to their staff. They didn't give immunity to the lawyers working for them. They didn't give immunity to the other people who might carry these acts out. That's a deterrent. That by itself means that those people understand that they still could face criminal prosecution. The second one was by laying out 3 separate sectors. Those are the right sectors. There should be areas where they should have immunity, and there should be areas where they don't. And even though they weren't clear about it, my guess is somebody attempts an assassination of a political opponent, they're going to have to go back to court, and they're going to end up back in front of the Supreme Court. And I'd be highly surprised to find out that the Supreme Court would withhold that within their decision. I think the Supreme Court was at least attempting to move in the right direction. And again, I don't completely agree with it, but I also think that, as you said, Henry, being hysterical, I don't think helps on this. So let's turn to this last subject, which is getting a lot of press, at least in the press that I'm reading, which is this Project 2025. Now, Project 2025 is a project done by the Heritage Foundation. It seems to be based on this concept of good government constitutionalism. I can't say that clearly, but this whole concept that the good government constitutionalists seem to be raising is what the good government constitutionalists seem to be raising is this idea that the originalists were wrong, and that they should be utilizing the Constitution as a means to try to promote what their version of good constitutionalism. Now, that makes me wonder whether one day the liberals begin to recognize that maybe the originalists weren't as much of their enemies as they thought. There might actually be a reason for them to be creating a coalition with them. That may be a request too far, but it seems obvious to me that there's a bigger connection between those two groups that oftentimes they're ignoring. But this 900-page document begins to talk about how you empower the presidency to a much greater degree than it's been empowered in the past. They utilize that as a means to try to promote their agenda against gay rights, and they utilize pornography as a means to go after transgenderism, and they obviously utilize that as a means to promote the issue that they have on abortion and other issues. I'm probably more worried about Project 2025, just on the concept. They've created this new group that they're utilizing to recruit people who they want to put into government. They say they want to get rid of 200,000 people inside the Justice Department, the FBI, the intelligence agencies on day one when Trump gets in, and then they're going to come up with these 30,000 people that they're going to try to get appointed back in, and they're taking applications and interviewing people now. A lot of some of the radical, very radical white nationalists, white racists began to criticize Trump when Trump began to distance himself from this. And I believe it's because of the recruitment process. They were a keen part of it. But nonetheless, Trump is trying to distance himself from it. And I'm not sure if that will work or not. He's had over 150 staff members that have been involved with it. But my take on that is good. We should, he very well may win the presidency. We just spoke about 3 big issues that to me seem to say he may actually end up becoming the next presidency. And I'd much prefer that he distance himself from this and then have to explain to us why he changed his mind after the election than to just use it as a part of some mandate that he's running on that he then utilizes to try to change the way that our government works. I'm interested in your opinion on everything that I just said. Feel free to disagree with me. Am I over exaggerating the importance of Project 2025? Is it too academically complex for the average American? Are the ideas that are within it problematic in your mind? But Bob, I'd like to start with you on that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think Project 2025 needs to be taken very, very seriously. The populist nationalist movement in the United States has organized itself through that and a couple of other efforts to hit the ground running if Trump is elected, to fundamentally change the nature of the national government. It's a serious document by serious people with a deep history within the MAGA movement. Now, it was never clear the extent to which this was an effort that Trump sanctioned and truly represented his agenda were he to be elected. And I think that remains unclear. So I don't think that it's entirely fair to say, ignore the Republican Party platform, which Trump reportedly personally edited, and instead look exclusively at the Project 2025 agenda. That's the real platform. Trump's not 900 pages deep in policy. That's just not the nature of the guy. And he will pick and choose. But that is the agenda of the political movement which Donald Trump leads, and therefore shouldn't be entirely dismissed. And Trump's disavowal of it shouldn't be taken at face value.
I agree with Bob that these efforts have to be taken seriously, but it's also important to note that there's more than one of them. So the Heritage Foundation's very large-scale attempts to recruit and train people to bring into the federal government and is only one of the various efforts that are being put forward on this front. So as a broad sort of conclusion, it's true. The populist nationalist movement is organizing. It has been organizing now for several years because they view Trump's failure to reform the federal government and to use the federal bureaucracy in the way that they view that progressives have in the past. They think that's one of Trump's major failings. And they want to remedy that in a second administration. But there are competing groups that are trying to do this. The Heritage Group is the largest. It's maybe the best funded and the best known, but there's no reason to believe that it's going to be hegemonic in its efforts, right? There are other groups that might be smaller that might have more influence at the very highest levels. So I think that some constellation of these groups' agendas is going to make its way into the Trump administration, both through policy ideas, but also through personnel. And the same way that we saw, this group around Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others help draft Biden's economic policy, and different factions from the Democratic Party staff up the Biden administration when they took over. So I think it's important to know what's going on within these different groups, but to remember that they're going to be competing for influence, and it's not entirely clear how that process is going to play itself out.
All right. So last two questions, we'll just call these bonus questions. Today, President Trump selected J.D. Vance as his vice president. To me, when I saw J.D. Vance, I thought that it was far and away the weakest of his choices. Now, I didn't think he would appoint who I thought he should appoint. I thought he should have appointed Nikki Haley, but right now, Nikki Haley may not even get an invite to the convention. But my reason that I thought Nikki Haley was, it didn't matter then if Joe Biden ran or if it was Kamala Harris or anyone else. Nikki Haley would have been a very, very strong ability for him to win. And it's questionable to me why he wouldn't pick the candidate or the person who was best suited for him to win. The second best choice, I thought, was Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio has a great ability to go out and create an attack, create a vision, talk about what needs to happen, and he would have really done harm to Joe Biden or to Kamala or anyone else with the Hispanic community. He would have been helpful as one of the first Hispanics who had been nominated as VP. My view of J.D. Vance is, he wrote Hillbilly Effigy. It was a very good book, but in that book he was fairly critical of Trump, and certainly around that book he was fairly critical of him. But he made an about right turn, one to get elected to a seat, is my guess, and I don't know, maybe he had a change of heart on some things. But I just don't see him as having the same advantage as the other two. I'm interested in knowing your opinion and whether or not you saw there as being a great advantage to J.D. Vance that maybe I didn't see. And the last thing that I want to hear from you is your prediction of the Republican convention. Right now, Trump is talking about having a unity speech. Maybe this thing goes smooth, comes off like glass, or maybe it's got Donald Trump written all over it, and the things that Donald Trump does just start to come out and it changes the narrative again. So I'd like to hear both your opinion on the vice president selection as well as what your predictions are for the convention itself. Henry, I'll start with you and I'll give Bob last word.
I think on Vance, it's a clear signal from Trump that he doesn't want or need the moderate Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney wing of the Republican Party, which I think is very interesting that he wants to break with them so completely. By picking a relative young newcomer whose main allegiance is to him. So that's my take on Vance. It's a shot across the bow of the Republican, the more mainstream, older Republican wing of the party. On the convention, I just hope it goes smoothly. I think we've had a really chaotic few weeks of the campaign. I think people are probably feeling pretty rattled. Overseas, people are looking very, very nervously at America in the upcoming election. I hope that it goes smoothly and that Trump strikes a conciliatory, unifying tone in his remarks. I think that would be a wonderful thing for America and probably for the rest of the world as well.
I think the Vance pick was highly revealing. I agree with Henry as to part of its political message. This is going to be a pure MAGA ticket. Vance, I think, was chosen for two reasons. That he will continue the MAGA policies post-Trump. It's a little bit more far-sighted than I usually see Trump as being. And second, he regards Vance as the guy who most effectively defends Trump on television and in other political forums. So it is a no concession to anyone else or any other faction. This is going to be a pure MAGA ticket, and Trump believes that's sufficient to win. It's highly revealing. In terms of the convention, I don't think that Trump and MAGA Republicans can help themselves. Even if a unity pitch is what would best serve them in the moment, I don't think they're capable of it. So I think you're going to see MAGA level vitriol and vindictiveness that will manifest its way through the entire convention. I will be very interested to see what Trump believes is a unity speech. I have a feeling it will be like his initial inauguration speech, thought to be a unity speech by no one but him.
All right, gentlemen, it'll be a fun week. We'll come back after the convention and see whether or not we were right on the prediction. I'll actually keep a nice little tape of this to make certain that we can throw up in your face what it was that you said, see if you were right. I appreciate you being here today, and we'll see you in the next version of The New Frontiers.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.